Hi, Lucy.
Hello. I love hearing another
How are
northern
you?
accent. Makes me so
I know.
happy.
It's brilliant, isn't
It
it?
really is. Oh,
Yeah.
God. And your smiley
So,
face.
do you want? I know. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, thank you. Yes. So I'm Lucy Wade. I am the creator and owner of You Don't Own Me, which is a website that focuses on the very difficult subject of domestic abuse, post-separation abuse. I write blogs, do lots around working with organisations to help them understand the challenges and the impact that domestic abuse has on individuals and their families. I also run a host a podcast even, called Dip In and Out with Lucy. And I speak to lots and lots, I'm very fortunate to speak to lots of different DA professionals who are willing to come on, talk about not only sometimes their own lived experience, but also what they do in terms of trying to make that difference, break down those barriers in talking about it, and basically just
Yeah.
make it a conversation that we shouldn't all be thinking of as taboo anymore. It shouldn't be.
Exactly, and that's why exactly the same reason. And we've talked before, just to, we find that women that have actually been through it, that's a
Mm.
natural progress in it, to be able to want to help others
Oh,
as
yeah.
much as possible,
Yeah.
to try and prevent it.
That's the thing, yeah. And that's what's so difficult is I think it's interesting. I had a message on LinkedIn this morning from somebody and we were talking, it was an ex-police officer, and they were talking about their experience over the years. And I was just saying, we're so far away from having any kind of real understanding as a society of what domestic abuse is about. And I think
Yeah,
the problem is so much of the shame and blame is put on the victim and on the survivor. It's why didn't they leave? Why don't they look for support? Why don't they? It's always that onus is always put back on them. And really,
yeah,
what we should be doing is saying, how can we help people who have been through what can only be described as a living hell?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And then what the face will also though.
Oh, well, this is why I focus mainly on, I mean, I talk about all areas of abuse, but I focus on post separation abuse. That is I hate to say it's my passion because I'd like to
I
see it
know.
eradicated for good,
Yeah, I know, I
but
know.
it is.
Wouldn't it be a better world if
Oh,
it were?
it unbelievably so. And I think
But
that's the
do you
difficulty.
know, like, we keep talking about the system and shaming
Mm,
victims, but the shame that's put on a victim is from start to
yeah.
finish. I always say I don't believe in women having to go into refuges with children. I
Mm,
think it's wrong. I
so
really do think it's wrong. I think that every refuge in this country needs turning into a jail.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's so hard. This is the thing. It's so, not everybody, and I say this regularly, not everybody is in a position to live with family, to live with friends, and that is like, when you say to people, can you imagine being in a situation where you've got nowhere else to turn? You literally have. And I think the problem is most people can't imagine that because they're not in that
I
position.
know,
And then there's
I
the
know.
unconscious bias that people don't talk about, which is, well, they may not say it out loud, but they're thinking it is, well, I'd never let that happen to me. And I've called
Yeah.
people on that before.
Do you
I've
know
known
what?
them.
Do you know what? I've said that all the time I was growing up,
Yeah. Yeah.
because I grew up with domestic abuse
Yeah.
and alcoholism.
Yeah.
I was in that environment, and all the way through my childhood, I said I would never ever live like that. I
No.
would never let my children see or hear any of that.
Yeah.
And it was like the universe went, "Oh, won't you? Here you go. Let's
Really?
let's see how you deal with it." And I
Yeah.
ended up having to deal with both issues because I ended up alcohol dependent
Mm,
because I used it as a coping mechanism.
yeah. Which a lot of people do. And again, there's the sad thing is you know, everybody has their own way of coping, and self-medicating is a very common one when it comes to
Yeah,
victims and survivors of abuse.
yeah.
Definitely.
And I do want to touch upon that
Yeah.
more, because I think, that made it even harder
Mm,
to I was controlled with alcohol basically,
mm,
and groomed with alcohol.
yeah.
And I think that when things do come to a head and you are put in that situation where, right, it's time to sort of disclose to
Mm,
professionals what's actually happening to me.
mm,
Um, it made it even harder
yeah.
because I was alcohol dependent.
Yeah.
And when I say
Absolutely.
alcohol dependent, I mean I needed alcohol to be able to function
Yeah.
in the end.
Yeah.
There was no sort of yeah, it were bad. It
Yeah.
were bad. And I ended up in hospital for 10 days detoxing. They didn't know whether I were gonna be here or not. Um, and that's ultimately it was like a double it were like and I actually remember being in A&E with the crisis team
Mm.
around me and police. And I said, either he's going to kill me or I'm going to kill
Self.
myself.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I've recently done the Jane Monkton Smith homicide timeline.
Yeah.
And I want to say, educational wise, I kind of knew a lot of it because of what I
Mm.
do. And you know, me and you, we eat, sleep, and breathe it,
Yeah.
don't we? Do you know what I
Absolutely.
mean?
Yeah.
So, and sometimes I get a bit naive to that. I think that people automatically get it, but it surprises
Yeah.
and shocks me that they actually don't.
No, they don't, and that's
Um,
scary. Yeah.
it is. But I kind of did that timeline, and more than education wise, it actually it triggered me to
Mm.
the point where I thought, Jesus, yeah,
That would have been
I was
me.
at stage,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I was definitely at that final stage, stage 8,
Yeah. It's
100%.
Do you know, it's interesting because I did an episode of my podcast with a chap called Tony Blockley, and he's head of criminology at Leeds Trinity University. And we were
Yeah,
talking about domestic homicide and we were talking about risk factors. And he said something so interesting. And the awful thing about abuse is it's so simple when we say it, but it's like you just said, it's trying to get people to understand it because we all understand it when we work in that world. You become blind to it sometimes when people don't understand and when they ask questions that you think, why on earth would you say, why didn't you just leave, and you think clearly we've got a long way to go. But what he said that was really interesting was when he was a police officer, he would go into situations and they would be high risk situations, and you would be trying to say to that victim, you do
mm,
realize that you need to be out of this situation, we need to get you out of this situation. And that individual would say, well, why? Because this is normal to me, this is my life, this is how I live, this is, my. And it really strikes you when people say things like that, that is somebody's norm. We all have
mm,
our lives and we all live our lives day to day, but who are we to judge somebody else for that is their normal life? Somebody controlling what they eat, somebody controlling what they wear. It might from the outside look like, well, that's ridiculous, how did you not see it? But it doesn't start off with a bang. It starts
no.
off very, very slowly, and it
But
takes time.
that's the trauma bonding, isn't it?
Absolutely.
You know, and
Absolutely.
I've had a woman said to me that she felt as though she was actually addicted.
Yeah.
It's like an addiction,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and sometimes I think that is how
Mm.
it needs to be looked at,
Yeah.
like an addiction,
Yeah.
because they know no they've normalized that
No. Yeah.
behavior,
Yeah.
and that trauma bonding
Yeah.
cycle. It's so hard, isn't it? So
It
hard.
is, and I think when the individual, when that victim survivor, they do trust their perpetrator so much. It's like that Stockholm syndrome, isn't it? They're in love with the captor, or they think it's love. But what I also find really sad is in these situations is when somebody is for them, because it is that normal to them. What I find sad is when people are, say, sitting in a session that I'm doing something, and you can see that they're listening. But I'd say, okay, but imagine the relationship you're in. Do you think the relationship you're in is perfect? Are you sitting here today thinking, I'd never let that happen to me? That's not going to happen to me. If you went away and looked at all the factors of domestic abuse, would you be able to say, no, my partner's never said, I'd rather you didn't go out with your friends, or, oh, I'd really miss you if you went out tonight, and I'd love it if we could spend time together. That can so easily be mistaken for protection. I'm protecting you. I want it to be
Mm,
me and you against the world. Actually, that's possession. They're being treated
mm,
like an object. They're being treated like a possession. And that's where it's so difficult because the lines are so blurred by the perpetrator. And I think, I've worked with people who are oversharers. And I mean, I'm an oversharer. I've learned in
I
recent
am.
years, I try and rein it in a bit, but
I know, I know. I wear my heart on my
yeah,
sleeve and I can't help that. I can't
exactly.
help
And a
it.
lot of victims and survivors are oversharers. They're empaths, and there's nothing wrong with being empathetic. I'd rather be somebody that was empathetic to somebody else's needs than have absolutely no
Yes.
self-awareness and be selfish.
I know. I
You
know,
know,
exactly.
and I think when a victim or survivor is sharing everything with their perpetrator, the problem is then that the perpetrator is taking all that information and storing it,
Yes.
knowing full well that at some point they're going to bring that out. Well, do you remember when
Yeah.
you said this? Or do you remember when?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they also pick your weaknesses,
Mm,
don't they? So so obviously, like, because I grew up like in that environment,
yeah.
and I want to say I don't suppose I wouldn't say I had a healthy relationship with alcohol, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. So I would go out at weekend with girls and get blind drunk, like most
Yeah.
do, um, but enjoyed more than the norm. Um, but then again, what is the
Well, I
norm, I
was just going to
suppose?
say to everybody, to
Yeah,
each their own.
and the thing is, it's not abnormal to finish work, go grab a bottle of wine after work because you've had a crap
Mm,
day.
yeah.
I'm gonna go get a bottle of wine.
Yeah.
Um, and that crap day leads into another crap day, and then when you're dealing with that relentless
Yeah. Yeah.
torment and cruelty, that's the only word I can describe it.
Mm,
It is pure cruelty.
it is. It is.
Um, and then you've got a man that is also drinking a large amount of alcohol.
Mm.
But guess what? He never drank before he met me. Yeah. Yeah. And you've got that. And then you've got it to the point where that starts increasing because that bottle of wine isn't numbing or blocking out
Yeah.
what it should
Yeah.
block out. So that bottle of wine goes to a bottle and a half.
Mm,
That bottle of half, eventually your body will tolerate that. So
yeah.
that bottle and a half isn't
Becomes,
doing what
yeah.
it should be. So then it's two, and it rolls. And then you've got I had the relentless text messages all day
Mm.
in because I had a hair salon. I was a hairdresser for 30 years,
Right.
and texted, "How many bottles of wine do you want bringing back tonight?"
Oh,
Yeah, every day,
yeah.
every day. But then he would use that as a form of not providing. So he would abuse financially in the
Mm,
aspect where he would say, "I've bought you your wine, so I'm not giving you anything towards anything this week."
yeah. You've
So
had what
it
you're
was
getting.
yes, yeah, and it was like that. And I will say another thing that I found a bit of a strange pattern with as well, Luz.
Mm.
I've noticed that a lot of victims are hairdressers.
Do you know, that's really interesting because when I worked at TDAS, the charity I work for, they were doing a campaign at the time around doing sessions for hairdressers because they were
Mm,
talking about not only are hairdressers themselves potentially victims and survivors, but also those who are going in as clients. You know, those who are
yeah,
sitting there talking and they might say something that makes the hairdresser think, hang on a minute, that doesn't sound right. But yeah, that is
yeah.
really interesting. Yeah, that's very
Yeah,
interesting.
I think this is my opinion on it. I think that what they see is when you're in that sort of hair and beauty industry,
Mm,
you have to look a certain way
yeah,
because you're presenting yourself, aren't you,
yeah.
to your
I'd
clients
never work as one
basically.
because look at the state of me. I wouldn't
Well,
survive
I was
5 minutes.
I was a lot more attractive when I was younger. Let's put it that
You're,
way.
you're lovely.
Um, but they have to they have to present themselves in a certain way. They
Mm,
have to be professional. And I think the very thing that attracts them, which is with every victim, the thing that they're attracted to is ultimately the thing that they want to
oh,
destroy.
yes. Oh, God, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I was at the end of my recovery, sorry, when I was at the beginning of my recovery, I sort of was in hospital for 10 days, and I came out. I'd lost my hair. I'd got ascites in my stomach, so my stomach was really out here. My skin had all gone see through thin. I'd lost so much weight. I had alcoholic hepatitis. I had stage 3 to 4 fibrosis. I had, and I was severely jaundiced. So I looked like a bit of a, it looked like a bit of an episode of Bart Simpson, to be fair.
Oh,
And
bless you.
I know I'm laughing about it, but it was
Yeah.
horrific. And I had to basically, I was so ill that I had to start building myself up
Mm.
physically, mentally. And the way that I could do that was I'd learnt to use meditation,
Yeah.
and I had to start walking a little bit because I couldn't walk very far.
Mm.
And I started walking, and my best friend, um, she was there with me every day. And this was right at the beginning of lockdown. So when I went into hospital, I literally had nothing.
Yeah.
I had their gown on. I had that was it. Couldn't go out at ward. I had nothing, and I came out, and it was beginning of COVID, and we were in lockdown, and it was just walking with her and
Mm.
just building myself up and talking
Yeah.
and reprocessing,
Yeah.
reprocessing, and a lot of meditation,
Yeah.
a lot of self care, and it took a long, long time. And I
Mm.
remember when I came out, I had my caseworker was he'd got lived experience of alcoholism,
Right.
and he would phone me every day,
Mm.
and I I would only tell him the things that I would never have told anybody. And do you know the reason why?
Mm.
Because he
You
knew
got
he
it.
got
You
it.
got it. Yeah.
He got it. He got it.
Yeah.
And this is the same thing.
Yeah.
It's when you are talking to people that have experienced
And they
that,
get it.
that you will only connect with your tribe.
Yeah.
Because if you try and explain to them what you've been through,
Mm.
and not only just during the abuse, I'm talking the post separation abuse as
Yeah.
well, social workers, how you treat by, we're being victim blamed. Oh, she must have lost a child because she's done something.
Yeah.
And you can imagine what I had, can't you, with alcoholism
Oh,
thrown in with that as well. And then the family court scenario. And it's that kind of thing. Social workers didn't want to look at the fact that I had no social care involvement before I met this man, and I'd brought a child up on my own for 7 years. I ran a successful
yeah.
business. I have a enhanced DBS that is clean. They didn't want to know all of that bit. They
No.
wanted to know, and they terrorized that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I was absolutely screaming for help. And it should have never got to the situation it got
No.
to.
No, and that's the thing is, why do they look at the kind of not the end result, but where it is at that stage? Why aren't they looking at why you were in that situation? Why don't
Yeah.
they go back? And that's the problem, is, and I find this a lot when you talk to different people who have experienced the family court, and they will always say, they won't go back, and the problem with abuse is it is historical. If you're
Mm.
if you're somebody who's going through the family
Yeah.
court system and you have only just realized that you have been in an abusive relationship for years, you are then in that point of processing it all. So when you're in
Yeah.
that situation and somebody is going into court and saying, well, actually, this, and this happened. Oh, well, you never said anything years ago. Well, why has this never been reported? Because you didn't know it was happening. You didn't
Yeah.
realize that was abuse. Because
Yeah.
if society in itself can't understand it, how the hell is somebody who's been put into that awful situation supposed to realize it themselves? And
Yeah.
it was interesting when you were saying about in terms of alcohol, one of the things I do in my sessions is I do kind of myth busting misconceptions around abuse. Because one of the questions I get asked a lot, and so I thought, you know what, I'm going to get it in there because it's just easier. Just put it in there so everybody knows.
Yeah.
And it's, does alcohol and drugs cause someone to be abusive? And I will always say drugs and alcohol will exacerbate a situation. They're bound to.
Mm.
The more somebody drinks, the more somebody takes drugs, it's bound to exacerbate it. But it doesn't cause someone to be abusive. An abuser cannot hide behind drugs and alcohol, i.e., your ex-partner. He
Agree.
can't hide
Yeah.
behind that. The fact is,
Agree.
an abuser chooses to abuse. It's as simple as that. It's nothing
Yeah.
else. They make that conscious decision, that choice, that they want all the power and control, and they won't be happy
Yeah.
until they've destroyed you. And it's that simple.
Yeah. Yeah. That's just a classic example though, because he knew what he was doing to me and he sat back and enjoyed that. So
Yeah.
towards the back end of the marriage, I was in and out of hospital.
Yeah.
I'd had pneumonia twice, and I was only 40 years old.
God.
Um, I had diverticulitis. There was a pattern
Mm,
forming where I was getting ill,
mm,
and he knew that.
mm,
And I remember an occasion where I didn't know I'd got pneumonia at the time because
mm.
it was a weird one. I
Right.
thought pneumonia would be where you can't breathe, and it's not. It
No.
was the most horrific pain straight
Supposed to
through.
be. I mean, I've touch wood, never had it, but I have heard it's the most
Yeah,
awful pain.
yeah, it is. Yeah, and I remember saying I crawled up on my hands and knees upstairs, and I said, I feel like I'm having an heart attack. And he wouldn't phone. He wouldn't phone the ambulance, and he said, "Go get phone somebody then." And I could hardly talk
Mm.
because the pain was so severe. And the ambulance came, and the ambulance man said to me, "Are you on your own, love?" And I said, "No, my husband's upstairs." And I remember them both looking at each other as if to say,
What the
"How the
hell?
hell is this woman
Mm.
in this state?" That point there, that point there,
Yeah. Why
they
wasn't
could have
something
picked
done?
up.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I find it unbelievable, Luce, even to this day, that ambulance crew are not trained in domestic
I
abuse.
know.
Frontline workers
Yeah.
going into
Social workers,
front,
just yeah,
yeah,
right.
they're not trained in it.
No.
And you know that if that had been me going into somebody's house and visualizing that
Yeah.
and seeing that environment, I'd have
Yeah.
picked up on that
Yeah.
like that.
And that's the awful thing is you're relying on people and you're relying on professionals to go with their judgment and their gut instinct. And some people will have gut instinct and some people will say, listen, I'm not trained in this. However, I'm seeing a pattern here and I think you need to go and get help. And there are some amazing
Mm.
people who'll do that. They haven't had training, they're going with their gut. They're going off script and saying, actually, I think you need help. But it shouldn't be like that. And something else I always say is, for a victim and survivor, it shouldn't be a lottery over getting a good social worker, a decent GP who
I
understands,
know,
a decent
I
police
know.
officer, a decent judge. It shouldn't be like it shouldn't be a lottery. And
Yeah,
it is at the moment. Sadly, that's the
it
truth
is
of it. If somebody is fortunate, because you will hear people say, I had a great social worker, I had a great this, I had a great they understood.
not very
Fantastic.
often.
No,
I don't hear that very
no. And
often.
that's and absolutely for those people, brilliant. And thank God that they get that, but that is so few and far between of what is actually
Yeah,
happening. And that's what makes it even
yeah,
more, I think, devastating is it just shows it can happen. If we
yeah.
didn't have those examples of the people that are doing the right thing, then it would make it kind of, worse. But it's so devastating that there can be the positive outcomes, and yet 99.9% of them are not, you know.
But I think in that situation, the problem was I'd been that I just couldn't see any way out of it. He'd took videos of me, which is another quite common one that they
Yeah.
do. So I'd have been intoxicated. He would take videos of me and stand behind his phone laughing. After he had gone on and on and
And
on
then click
and
record. Yeah.
I would sit there and just take it and take it and take it, and he would always stood up above
Mm,
me, that domineering, speaking down,
mm.
shouting
Shouting
down at
down at
me.
you. Yeah. Yeah.
But they always know that one topic that will just crack you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like you said, when you have had a drink or you've taken something, it's you snap. And
Mm,
I would retaliate
mm.
because he'd said something about my mum. Well, that were
It's a
just
no-go
like
area. Yeah.
red rag
Yeah.
to a bull.
Mm,
Something that he knew would get me.
yeah.
And then he would stand back and video. And there was that added stuff as well, which is really, really common
Mm,
as an example of what they do.
yeah.
So that's another way of entrapping you in that situation
Yeah.
because of the threat of that.
And isn't it? Do you know what? I always think it's so incredible when down the line somebody can see the pattern of what that individual is doing, what that perpetrator is doing, and they can say, "I'm not going to give it the oxygen." There's
Mm.
so many people that I've either worked with or spoken to who said, they've sent this email and they've done it to rile me. And I started and I was typing back and I was saying this and I was saying that. And then I stopped and thought,
Mm.
I'm not gonna give it the I am gonna go, down that very professional business route and say, okay, I'm gonna treat this as if it's a business email. And
Mm.
once you get to that point, and I think so many people do eventually get to that point where they say, you know what, they know exactly what buttons to push and that's what they're doing. And I'm not, it's so much harder when you're living in it to not have those buttons pushed. But I
Yeah.
think post separation abuse, and one of the things I regularly suggest to people who are experiencing it, saying, I just don't know how to communicate with them. There's just no communicating. If I say this, they'll say that. If I say 3 o'clock to pick the kids up, they'll say no, 4. They'll do it just to be difficult. They'll do it to cause problems. And what I always say is, if you can take the emotion out, I mean, post separation abuse now, but if
Yeah.
people can take that emotion out and say, I'm going to deal with this as the children, not our children, the children, you're automatically then making it more of a business, which sounds awful. It sounds like, oh my God, that's your children, though. But the second you're saying our children, you're bringing emotion into it. You're bringing in memories in your head. You're bringing in all these things. If it's the house, the children, the car, whatever, then you're showing the perpetrator, actually, I've never known her speak like that before. I've only ever known her get really emotive. And when you really, so much less is more when it comes to that
Mm.
stage. And I've known so many people say, they've messaged back going, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you biting? Why aren't you
Yeah.
getting angry? And that peace that comes for so many with just going, don't need to, don't respond, don't give it oxygen, don't give it
Yeah.
air. And I think, less is more, minimal. And what I've said to people in the past, so I used to do some of the group facilitation at the charity I work for. So we'd be giving sort of talks and things. And as part of the program, people will be saying, I had one lady who was actually sitting in the group and she's texting away because something had happened. I think it was to do with finances and whatever it had been with credit cards, something like that. And she was panicking. And it got to the break and I just went and sat next to her and I said, can I just say, if just for 2 seconds, put your phone down? And she did. And I said, please don't send whatever it is you're typing right now. Take some deep breaths. I'm going to get you a cup of tea. We're going to have a chat and let's talk through it. And we did. And she started reading back. She's like, yeah, I don't want to say that. And I said, believe me, it's all right for me to sit here and say, don't send it because you want to send it. You want to send
Yeah.
it so badly. You want to say, and the
Yeah.
thing is, for so many victims and survivors, they're telling the truth. They're telling the truth, but sadly,
I know.
it doesn't look good
They're
for
not
them. No,
believed. I
exactly. And
know.
it's not going to look good for them. So it's so much better to sit back and go, okay, as much as I really want to say that, I'm going to type it all out, but then delete, start again, take your time, think about what it is in that message that needs a response, whether it's over picking the
Yeah.
kids up, whether it's over whatever, anything else that's in there about your character or your personality or what you did last week, that doesn't matter. That's just them goading. That's just them trying to get a reaction. And once people
Yeah.
get to the point where they realize not giving a reaction will drive a perpetrator crazy, then they're there and you're there. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Once you get to
Yeah.
that point where you can go, do you know what? I don't need to bite. I don't need to. Yes, I want to say it all because it's true, and so many times I've said to people, I know it's not fair. I know it's
Yeah.
so cruel and it's so unfair and it's so unjust,
Yeah.
but don't make it worse. Stand back and say, actually, and also, you're worth more. You're worth more than bringing yourself down to their level. You're worth more than rolling in the mud with them. Let them roll in the mud. You're moving on. You're
Yeah.
moving forward in your life. You don't need to be dealing with that. Let them carry on doing that. That's
Yeah.
that's usually what I
It's
try and suggest.
I think it's just so hard, isn't it,
Yeah,
when you've got a system that's enabling abuse,
yeah,
they are literally just they're giving them the bloody green light to go, aren't they?
yeah,
Let's face it, it's true.
yeah, yeah,
And every the odds are absolutely stacked against women
yeah,
that are going through
yeah,
this.
yeah.
They are.
And
When children are
I was
involved,
just going to say, when children are
it's
involved, it is. I think we were talking just before we started recording, and one of the things I think I said to you was when I talk about post separation abuse, I try and talk about it in a really not in a scary way, but in a very honest way. And I
yeah,
describe it in part of part of the session I do. I describe it as a marathon, not a sprint. I said because with a marathon, you know, it's a lot, it's a bloody long way. I've never done one myself,
yeah,
but
yeah,
also imagine it's a marathon, but with the finish line that keeps moving further and further away from you, because the perpetrator keeps moving those goalposts and the kids are young.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest sadnesses I have is when I speak to somebody and they'll say, and my kids are 3 and 4, and my heart sinks.
I
My heart
know, I
sinks and I
know,
think, oh God,
I
they've got
know.
years of
That's a
this.
long I know,
And
I know.
and I think all you can say is you are going to need help. You are going to need to, you're 100% right with the meditation, self-care, well-being. You're not being selfish if you go and have a bath. Well, yeah, but I need to do this with the kids. The kids will
And
manage for 5 minutes while you look after your own health and your
yeah,
own well-being.
and reach out and find your tribe
Yeah,
because
absolutely. And
that
don't be
is
ashamed
such
to
an
find your tribe.
important
That's the
no,
thing is, I think so many people are struggling in silence, and I think especially for those with children, they're trying to prove to the world, I can hold down a job, I can look after my kids, I can go to family court 20,000 times in a year, I can
yeah,
help take care of my parents because they're getting old. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. I can do it all. I'm Superwoman or I'm Superman. Yeah, that's it. I can do it all. And you can't, because eventually you're going to burn out, you're going to hit
mhm,
rock bottom. And the problem is you've got to think to yourself, right, I need to take care of me because I need to take care of my children. And if I don't
yeah,
take care of me, I can't take care of my children. And I will regularly say it is not easy. It is a very, very long road with post separation abuse, but you can get there. 100% I've seen people come out the other side of it. And yes, it is difficult. And there are
well,
things, yeah,
we have
you can
loads,
do it.
haven't
You
we?
can do it. 100% you can do it. And I think it's just while you're going through it, you need the help, you need the support. And another thing I always say is not the same type of support works for everybody. It depends on the person. So somebody might,
Yeah,
I've had people who've come to group facilitation, loved it, thought it was brilliant. You've had some come going,
yeah,
this ain't for me. I'm not a group sharer. Don't want to do it.
yeah,
Then you've had
yeah,
people who've gone, actually one to one is perfect for me. You've had people who've gone, I've listened to a brilliant podcast, I've listened to something. I don't want to go and look for support. I want to do it in my own time, on my own terms. And that's why it's so
yeah,
important. We have all these things out there, like what you're doing, what I'm doing. It's so important because you're giving people freedom of choice as to how they find that support and timing.
yeah,
I always talk about timing because it's not the same for everybody. When people say, why didn't they just go and find support? Someone can go and look for support, just like they can for drug and alcohol addiction. They can look for support over mental health, lots of different things. But if it's not the right time, it's not going to work because someone's going
yeah.
to walk in and go, I'm not ready for this. I'm sorry. I'm not ready to unpack all this. Thank you very much. I might come back in 6 months.
But that goes back to like the addiction
Yeah.
thing because it's kind of like to what once it was all over. When I say all over, I mean it'd gone
Mm,
basically. Um, the post separation abuse sort of fueled the alcoholism
mm.
for me to be able to cope even
Even
more
more.
then. And even in that time, I'd gone to, I'd gone to try and get help, but I didn't associate myself with. And I know it sounds awful. It sounds awful, but at that time, I probably weren't ready to. Well, I weren't
No,
ready,
you weren't
and
ready. No, you
I relapsed. I kept
yeah,
relapsing.
yeah.
I think I relapsed 2 or 3 times, and like you say, I went to AA. That weren't for me.
No.
That weren't for me. It works brilliant for some
Yep,
people,
absolutely.
but it didn't for me. But with Resolute, what we do is we create that care plan for them when they're referring to us,
Yeah.
and we always say it's their care in their own
Yeah,
time at their own pace.
yeah.
And we have a charity shop, a holistic therapies, and an office space in Barnsley Town Centre.
Brilliant.
And I want that. I wanted that building publicly known.
Yeah,
That building is there. It's out there. It's in the heart of the community.
yeah,
If women want to come in and have a browse or a chat or whatever,
yeah.
it's there. It's openly
Amazing.
there available.
Yeah.
I didn't want us to be another poster behind a toilet door
No,
in a woman's
no.
cubicle.
It needs
It
to be
is not
seen.
it is not their victim shames to carry.
No, it's not.
Um,
It's not.
and that is where I think that these platforms, I mean, thanks to social media and stuff,
Yeah,
these platforms are brilliant for us to be able to get everybody's voices heard.
yeah, definitely.
I think there's a lot that's trying to do their own little bits in their own little way, but I still think that if everybody
Came
came
together.
together
I know.
as
It's
one mass,
yeah,
as one mass, this
Yeah.
would be cracked so much faster.
Yeah, that is the, and it's interesting because I was talking recently about education, and I was saying, because somebody said to me, how do we kind of bring about the end of domestic abuse? I said, listen, I would happily be out of a job tomorrow, 100% happily be out of a job tomorrow if it meant that not one other person on the planet had to experience this. And it's the same the world over.
Me
I've
too.
done, yeah,
Yeah,
I've done episodes with people who were in Canada, who were in Australia. These
yeah.
it is the same the world over,
Oh, it's
and
yeah,
that's
I've
the
said
terrifying
this.
thing.
Yeah, I did one yesterday or day before yesterday. I did a podcast where We Spoke,
Yeah,
the organisation in New York, and she has referrals in from UK,
yeah,
Australia. I've had referrals in from Australia. It is a
it is.
global
It is.
issue,
Yeah,
and the family court
I know.
is a global issue.
Oh,
It's not just
100%.
happening in the UK,
No,
it's
it is
worldwide.
worldwide. And when you realise that and you realise the impact of it, and so when I was being asked this question about, what can we do? And I said, so much of it comes back to education. We're so willing to teach our children in year six about sex
Yeah.
education. Why are we not,
Yes.
in an age appropriate way, having those conversations about what isn't acceptable in a
Yeah.
relationship? But the
Yeah,
problem for
and
me,
boundaries.
yeah,
Boundaries. They need
absolutely.
to know those
Absolutely. My
boundaries,
daughter
don't they?
has up in her bedroom, she has she was given this, and it's called the circle of control. And it's not just for children, it's for adults as well. It's used in lots of different ways, but when it's used within domestic abuse situations, so T-Dash use it as well. But it's good for any
Yeah.
area of life, to be perfectly honest. And it
Yeah.
teaches you that within the circle, that's what you can control. What is outer of the circle, you can't. So how someone speaks to you, how somebody treats you, all these things, you can't control that. And within the circle, it's what can you control? Well, you can control how you react. You control how you
Yeah.
respond. You control how you can take care of yourself. There's so much you can control. And once you accept what you can control and let go of what you can't, I'm not saying everything's solved, but if children were taught more things like that,
Yeah.
it would not necessarily stop domestic abuse, because if children are living in that environment, we've got this ongoing cycle, and that needs breaking, that whole generational trauma of abuse that goes on, and you've experienced it yourself. But if
Yeah.
children were to see, okay, so that's not acceptable, because one thing that drives me mad, because when both my children were in primary school, this, and it's not just their school, I think it's all over, is, well, you have to forgive and forget, and you have to, invite everybody back into the group. What if that person that you're inviting back into your group is the biggest bully, the biggest potential
Yeah.
perpetrator in the future, and you're telling me I've got to allow my child to be besties with these people? No,
Yeah.
I'm going to teach my children, no, you stand up for yourself, you say thank you very much, but that's not for me. Those are my
Yeah.
boundaries at 10, 11 years of age. Thank you very much, but you know what, I'll find my own tribe, and I might find
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
tribes. I might have lots of different
Yeah.
tribes that might work for me. But I think
Yeah.
if we were to educate children and educate boys and girls on how to treat somebody in a relationship, because for me, the problem is it happens in secondary schools, and lots of charities go into secondary schools and they talk about healthy relationships. For me, it's too late by then. Once they're sort
Yeah.
of 13, 14, 15, it's too late. It
Yeah.
needs to be so much younger than that for them to accept. And it doesn't have to be done in a scary way. But if we're willing to talk about sex education and talk about biology to children who are going to go from a very safe, very small environment to a massive secondary school where everything changes, and you have to find your feet and you have to find your independence, and you walk into school, which you've never done before, or you get in the tram, or you get in the bus, or we need to be empowering those children to say, you know what, no. And I'm allowed to say
Yeah.
no. I don't have to be a
Yeah.
people pleaser. I don't have to be a yes person. I'm allowed to say no. And we're not doing that. And that's where I think if they ploughed more bloody funding into education in that
I
respect,
know.
then you wouldn't
Yeah.
have the millions and millions of whatever it is they say we've got in terms of debt now. I think the DA commissioner said it recently, the impact it has on the
78
economy.
billion.
So why aren't we
78
50,
billion.
so why are we not?
78
It,
billion. And they are not putting anywhere, not even a fraction
yeah,
of that back into
yeah.
services that are actually doing all the
That
graft.
doing the graft, and a lot of
You
the
know,
time doing
let's
it for
face
nothing.
it. Exactly. And we've spoke about this, haven't we?
Yeah,
Because I don't like this. I don't like this where you've got authorities and you've got the government and some legal firms that are using lived
yeah.
experience
Yeah.
They're using their voices, they're using their experiences, and they are profiteering from it.
Yeah.
And I don't like it.
No,
It's not right.
it's not
You
right.
know, end of the day, it's exploitation.
It is. And
If you
yeah.
want to use somebody's experience,
Mm,
time, emotions, everything else,
mm.
then reward them by paying
You
them.
see so much
Because
of
a
this on
lot of
LinkedIn, don't you now? I see it so
yeah,
often, people
a
going,
lot of
yeah,
yeah, a lot of
yeah,
survivors are giving their time for free.
yeah,
They are they are so passionate about it because they don't want this to happen to anybody else.
no,
But yet you've got the hierarchy that are profiteering from them experiences, ticking a box to say,
we've
we've
done
got
it.
lived experience,
Yeah,
we've got this board
yeah,
that we've created. And
yeah,
what they do is they make you, as a survivor, a member of these boards to big you up.
yeah.
They don't want to pay you for it.
No,
They don't want
no.
to pay you for it. They don't want to pay. It's like we Resolute, we we have referrals in from mental health. We
Mm,
have referrals in from GPs. Referring into us.
mm,
We're not. We don't have any funding.
no.
We are literally all volunteers, not earning a penny.
All doing it to make a
All
difference.
doing,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
it's
and it's wrong. And there are so many charities and CICs, kicks, that are having to close their doors
yeah,
because of that. There is no funding out there for domestic abuse services, and it's wrong.
yeah.
When you've got a domestic abuse commissioner saying that it costs this country
70.
78
Yeah,
billion estimated,
yeah,
estimated,
yeah.
then why are they not putting at least probably three quarters of that
It back
back
into
in?
yeah, exactly, exactly. And this is this is the problem, isn't it? It's like anything in life, the solution usually is very straightforward and very simple, but it never seems to be the case. And this is why, this cycle is continuing because it will keep happening. There's only so much anyone can do as a human being, like you say, as a lived experience person, as a DA professional, whatever it is, there's only so much anyone can do. And without support, without financial support, then how are people expected to keep going? And like you say, the,
No,
the,
I
the
know.
interesting thing is anyone who I've not met anybody who works around DA that doesn't eat, sleep, and breathe it. Like we were just talking
I
about
know.
before. I've never met
Yeah.
anybody that works in that area who isn't beyond passionate about it. And the sad thing
Yeah.
is, like you say, they get exploited then because it's a case of, well, yeah, you're so passionate about it, therefore you should want to do it for free, whatever. And it is,
Yeah,
it's
but
yeah,
what they make you believe is that they're giving you some sort of
platform.
accreditation,
Yeah,
yes, and accreditation, and you know,
yeah,
and I don't like it. I think it's wrong. I
mm,
think it is so wrong.
yeah,
I sit in meetings where I'm probably the only one that's not getting paid,
yeah,
but yet I'm the one, as many other survivors and lived experience will be the same,
yeah,
that are actually bringing something valid to the table,
yeah,
to be fair.
yeah,
Because I sit in meetings and think, Jesus, what an absolute waste of time.
yeah.
2 hours on a strategy that outworked. So we'll have another meeting
To
in another
discuss
3 weeks' time to discuss why the strategy didn't work. And then we'll have another meeting for a new
for
strategy.
another strategy of a strategy that hasn't
What?
worked. I know, I know, I
Exactly.
know.
Exactly.
It,
It
yeah,
boggles my
it,
mind.
it does, and that's the sad thing is it's because you can see it, and when you see it,
Yeah.
so it was interesting. Somebody, I did an episode the other day, and it was a guy called Jared Whittaker and a lady called Sam Billingham.
Yeah, I've interviewed both of
Yeah,
them.
and they're lovely, lovely people, and
Yeah.
they both. It was really interesting. Jared said it, and then Sam was obviously agreeing, and he said, once you experience abuse, it's like you're living in the matrix because you can see it.
Mm.
Nobody else can see what's going
I
on. And I
know.
thought that's a
I
really good
know.
analogy. I like
It
that.
is. It
It's
is.
those who've experienced it, those who work in that area. It's like you're in this surreal other world that everybody on the
Yeah.
outside is just judging and shaming and blaming and going, well, why didn't you look for help? And why didn't you do this? And why? And that I thought that was really interesting recently with the case in France with that amazing woman Giselle, and when she,
Oh
you
yeah.
know, shame needs to switch sides, I think
Mhm.
one of the best quotations that anyone could ever say. It's so true.
It
Why
is.
is it we always lay the blame and shame at the victim and survivor's door? Why isn't it put right where it belongs, at the feet of the
Yeah.
perpetrator? Why are we always? Yeah.
But that's where I was trying to get to with refuge. Women and children should not be going into refuge like it's their
And moving
fault.
out of
They're the
the
ones that
area, why is it always the victim
they're the
survivor? Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
they're always having to sacrifice everything while
Yeah.
you've got perpetrators walking round living their normal
Breaching
day-to-day
non-moral orders,
life.
breaching restraining orders, doing whatever the hell they like,
Exactly,
intimidating your
exactly.
family and friends. Yeah.
Yes, yes, it does not affect their world whatsoever.
Yeah. I've
These
seen it
women have
so
lost
many times.
everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all back to front.
Yeah.
The entire thing is back to
Yeah.
front. So turn the refugees into prisons because if a woman and a child and their children are deemed so unsafe that they have to go to the other end of the country
Yeah.
to go and stay in a refuge where they're not allowed to tell anybody where they are,
Yeah.
and same for children, the
Yeah.
schooled inside them, relying on Christmas presents from
Yeah.
anywhere and everywhere for the
It's
children.
devastating.
And you've got perpetrators just walking,
Yeah.
living the normal
Living the life.
lives.
I know, and
It's not right.
this is when and I say so many times, it's not fair. It's not just. None of it is. And I just think the more we keep banging the drum, shouting about it, I'm not saying that everybody listens, not everybody does, but from something I've done recently, I suppose in some ways you have to take the positives where you can, and that's the only way I get through it. Is
Yeah,
when I'd done this session recently for Alzheimer's Society, and their lived experience group had kind of all but died out. And then from that session, it revived the group. More people were joining it. More people were actually saying, you know what, I need support. It's that kind of thing that makes me think. Because when I started this out, I remember thinking the purpose of starting the blogs initially was I never want anyone lying there at 3 o'clock in the morning, staring at the ceiling, thinking, I might as well end it all because I really don't know which way to turn. I'm
mm,
so alone. My friends don't understand. My family don't understand. My work, I can't even tell.
yeah,
There's so many. And I just remember thinking, even if it helps one person, and the fact that it is helping, and the
yeah,
fact that it is, what you're doing, it's just incredible. And we are making a difference. As much as it feels like we're making a small dent, it doesn't matter. It
yeah.
is making a difference. And that's what you've got to keep telling
I'll
yourself.
tell you what, Lucy. I can hand on heart sit here and say I know 100% that I have saved women's
Yeah.
lives.
Yeah.
And I know that,
Yeah.
and
And what a
they'd sit on
feeling.
here and,
What a
and
feeling to
tell you
know that. Yeah.
exactly. And when I started Resolute, very naively, because I didn't really know how big it would
Yeah.
escalate. I said if I could just help
Yeah.
one woman not to endure what I went through alone,
Yeah.
then
And it'll
it's
make all
it's
the
worth doing
difference.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And you
yeah.
are. You're doing amazingly. You should be very
And
proud.
so are you.
We give ourselves a little pat on the back.
We are proud because we
Yeah.
should be proud of what we're doing because
Yeah.
ultimately, you know, we're trying to prevent this, and prevention is the key
It is.
to it all
It
ultimately.
is.
And there's so much that can be prevented with it, but
Definitely.
we've just got to keep going,
We
girl,
do. And we will.
haven't we?
And we will. And we come together. And this is it. When I think when people hear things like this or watch it, for me, it shows them that, oh, it's not just that one person saying, there's two people saying, oh, there's three
Exactly,
people. And it
exactly,
starts to have
exactly. And
effect.
he's getting
Yeah.
he's getting them all together in one big mass,
Wouldn't that be
banging
amazing?
that drum.
We'll see that
It'd be
day.
it.
We will.
Yeah,
We'll,
we
we'll be
will.
there
We will.
together.
Yeah, there'll be loads. There'll be loads, I reckon. We've just got to keep at
Keep
it.
going. Keep going.
But
Oh,
if anybody wants to, please contact me at Team Resolute
absolutely.
at resolutesport.uk.
Yeah.
So I want to love you and leave you now, Luz.
Oh, thank you so much. You've been amazing. I'm so grateful to be on today. Thank you.
I've loved it. Well,
Feeling empowered on a Friday morning.
exactly. Come on, girl.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Luz. I'll speak to you soon and you take care.
You too.